The Lords of the Fallen looks like it wants to be the next Elden Ring, and I wanted to take a look at some brand new screenshots as well as the co-op info, and why are they welcoming the comparisons to Elden Ring? I really want to look at some of the articles, headlines, and things that people are already saying about Lords of the Fallen, and what do you think? Is it even a good idea to set your sights on being similar to Elden Ring? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And thanks so much for watching the content. These screenshots just came out. There's roughly 8 of them, and I really do think this makes me want to play the game even more. Now, I am sort of a latecomer to From Software games. I recently just sort of got into them in anticipation of Elden Ring. I obviously had my criticisms of some of the things they did in Elden Ring. Particularly, it would have been nice to have seamless co-op. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I also thought the overuse of like AoE and spam in the endgame was a bit of a problem. So when I see a game like The Lords of the Fallen, it immediately makes me think, maybe I'll get like a really good game. I enjoyed Sekiro and Dark Souls 3 a bit more. So you can see here with the art style, just the use of lighting, and I think you can sort of impress us with screenshots. I really want to see actual raw gameplay, because at this point in time, we're continuing to see screenshots that really wow us. If you look at some of the Atomic Heart screenshots versus the actual gameplay, it looks like a very different game. But overall, you can see the From Software influence in these pictures. Giant, sort of grotesque monsters, sort of gothic scenery, sort of scary places, foreboding, just awfulness that no one wants to face. The thing that I've always enjoyed about games like this is the sense of gravity and the sort of foreboding fear that, like, you don't really want to go to the next area. But when you see pictures like this, obviously, it makes you think of Elden Ring and a more larger open world size and approach to that From Software Souls-like element. If you really think about it, up to now, whenever a game sort of sets its sights on being a Souls-like, there are some very predictable formulas that you can follow. You can sort of put people into a world that's very corridor-driven, and this might be a departure from that, just based on these images. And also, just the style of the enemies and sort of the crampedness makes me think as well of FromSoft games. That's always been a bit of a criticism from me. You put me in these very cramped areas. I always talk about, having to fight in a closet is what I always say. Don't put me in a closet. I want to be able to see. And, obviously the FromSoft boys always tell me that it's about positioning and you have to consider that the camera stinks. And I just think that's fandom defending bad game design. But, you can see here a very large sort of greatsword and some grotesque monsters in front. And then again, as is customary for games like this, I love settings like this, like really, really nice scenery. It was one of my favorite things about Ghost of Tsushima with the duels, like setting up a really, really great place to fight. I think can really add to that sense of you're doing something epic and awesome, like something from a movie. And without question, you can see here, sort of hinting at something we're going to talk about in a moment, the co-op elements of the game. But again, that's just that nasty, awful, gross, macabre-looking creatures that you really want to rid the world of. And I'm actually very interested in what this game feels like in co-op, because I actually never did co-op in Elden Ring, but I think games like this could be very fun. I know people tell me all the time I'm missing out, especially with the co-op mods for Elden Ring. The drop-in, drop-out was apparently amazing. A shame that's not built into the game sort of natively, because I would have loved to do that on console. This is one of my more favorite images, especially because really reminds me of some of the things from Lord of the Rings, like the Nazgul. If you look at the crown here that he's wearing, and again, just the art style I think is phenomenal for this game. Very clear influence, I think, in just sort of the stance and the over-the-shoulder look of what we saw in Elden Ring. But I do like that the dragon is not sort of the more traditional style dragons that we saw in Elden Ring. It seems like a bit of a departure with the 3 heads, and then it's mounted by something, which I'm sure could be pretty fun to fight against. And the last screenshot here, this was the one that really screamed FromSoft. Just large, just expansive open area. And even this hand, I'm fairly certain if we go back to one of the pictures, that right there in the background looks like that hand. So it does look like these are areas that will be traversable. And if they're not traversable, these screenshots certainly indicate that they are, because we're seeing roads, pathways, rivers, buildings. It looks like something that you would go and explore. And just the weapon and the stance, this just looks so much like Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring kind of smashed together, which I'm all about it. Now, I'm just going to leave these screenshots up. I'll just periodically switch it just so you have something nice to look at instead of my, full screen mug. I want to read some of the things that we have now about co-op info. So we have the Lords of the Fallen co-op information here from an interview with theloadout.com. They did an interview. Oh, actually, they're recounting an interview with Edge Magazine with the creative director, Cesar Virchosu. I hope I'm saying that even close to correct. And he outlined that the co-op mode will be seamless and untethered. Rather than use several in-game items to spawn other players, each session will get co-op participants together for as long as they desire. Whereas dying in Elden Ring would send you back to your own world, the Lords of the Fallen places fallen friends in a spectator mode. You'll be able to join the battle again if your ally can safely resurrect you. Now, I absolutely love this change. I played The Last Hero of Nostalgaia. It's sort of a play on the word nostalgia. I played The Last Hero of Nostalgaia with a friend of mine on Friday nights. Every once in a while, I play with my man Hilly. That's a members-only thing, and it's a blast. Like, we're having drinks and laughing and playing games. And he said, this is exactly how it works in Elden Ring. And it was really, really frustrating, tedious, and arguably stupid. Every time he died, we had to sort of start over, send a new code number, and then he got back in. So the fact that the Lords of the Fallen is saying, listen, we can take inspiration from these games. We can even kind of copy them to a degree, but we don't need to copy something archaic, dated, and arguably kind of dumb. Like, why build it that way? So this, to me, already makes the Lords of the Fallen more appealing as a potential co-op endeavor compared to like what Elden Ring basically did, that didn't feel like they really innovated enough on that aspect, especially since it was an open world game. Now, according to this interview though, playing with friends still comes at a cost, and this is something that I don't like. Playing with your friends will come at some cost, though. Co-op mode aligns you with the Radiant Church, an in-game faction which will call upon PvP invaders. Apparently, you can do something called an Umbral itself, which will task players with avenging the deaths of other players. However, you have to fight a supremely powerful AI foe to do that. So there are some other things you can do when you decide to do this. And I think, that's cool if they have that higher level of challenge. But I have never been a fan of this. If I want to play with a friend, if I want to play with a buddy, why can't you just ratchet up the difficulty? Why can't you just increase the health or the damage output of the enemies? Now, I know that's more challenging. I actually thought Returnal's approach to co-op was rather brilliant. They didn't really adjust the enemy's aggro or damage output or your health. You just have to share all of the items. And in a rogue, especially one like Returnal, it actually works rather well, because what it does is it essentially splits the potential power of one person between two people. So you don't each have really maxed out weapons, maxed out health, and all of the other stats that come along with it. I thought that was a brilliant decision in Returnal. I don't know if something like that could be done in a game like The Lords of the Fallen, because I know what people will say. They'll say, listen, man, if you're going to play a game like this and suddenly have somebody else with you, they need to do something to round that out. They need to do something to add a heightened sense of difficulty. And I think that's fair pushback, but I don't think that's necessarily the answer. I would love to be able to play a game like this, face the open world, face the bosses, face whatever, and not have to have people invade, because this is what typically happens with invasion. There's a PvP meta that forms. It's unavoidable in virtually every game. And when a PvP meta forms, that's all you end up facing. Every time you're in a fight, you end up facing someone who essentially says, hey, I know what to use, and that's all I'm going to use. And that can get really irritating. They go for max efficiency. They essentially optimize the fun out of the game. Everybody runs the scummy meta build, and that scummy meta build is essentially an evening ruiner for you, and you're just trying to play with your buddy. So I don't know if they're going to elaborate more on that, exactly how co-op will work in this game, because I understand it on paper, but in practice, it always turns to some level of metagaming or griefing, and it becomes pretty much a nuisance. So a great feature is sort of cannibalistically ruined by all of the people out there that don't really care about co-op, and they don't really care about the spirit of, PvP. They're just playing to be kind of a jerk, or they're just playing to purely figure out what's the best way to win. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's human nature. But I do think if you're wanting to play with your buddies, that's kind of a souring effect that can happen. Now, obviously, when you think about these comparisons with its open world, it looks like a FromSoft game. It looks like it's going to be incredibly challenging. There's co-op, and they decided to sort of depart with their co-op from the way that it's been done in Elden Ring. They actually welcome the comparisons to Elden Ring. In this same article from theloadout.com, Virtuoso is aware that players will come into the game with Elden Ring on their minds. Yet, this comparison has not affected the game's vision. Quote, "We're seeing comments like Elden Ring meets Bloodborne and Elden Ring meets Diablo. That's hugely positive for us." So this doesn't seem to be a problem for them. I know probably in the realm of art, I remember when I got into t-shirt design just for fun, this is an age ago, this is another lifetime, but I remember when people would tell me, oh, this shirt reminds me of this style, or this style reminds me of this artist over here. It always kind of drove me crazy, because it's like, man, I spent all this time working on this, and you immediately just whittle it down to, oh, this just looks like a this, or this just reminds me of that. So I'm sure that, people who make music, or people who make video games or movies or TV shows don't really particularly enjoy when it's like reductionist comparisons to something that's already out there. However, Elden Ring is probably a game that you don't mind necessarily having people say, oh, wow, that game really makes me think of Elden Ring. That game really makes me, want to go back and play Elden Ring. And obviously, there is an air there that you've got to be careful, because then people are going to expect it to be as good as Elden Ring. There are all these headlines essentially saying that. They're saying, listen, this is the next Elden Ring. And that might not be a great thing to say about a title before it comes out. We've seen this with other games. Anytime a game has like loot and guns in it, it gets compared to another looter shooter. Then everybody says, "Oh, is this going to be the game that kills that looter shooter?" Well, anybody entering the sort of Souls-like FromSoft style game world is likely to be compared to these games, so they probably know that going in. And being compared to Elden Ring, they're taking it as a compliment, or they think it's, quote, hugely positive for us. So that tells me they're pretty confident in their game. And that's a really good sign, because there was an article by ggrecon.com that literally had the headline, "The Lords of the Fallen is trying to be 2023's Elden Ring." Like, I don't know if they're on record saying they want to be 2023's Elden Ring, but these guys are saying it with their article. They said, quote, "The Lords of the Fallen very much seems like it's attempting to channel the From Software design philosophies that makes it work on Souls-like games so compelling." Yeah, I think so. I also think the idea of opening up a game that's in that From Software format and the Souls format and letting it breathe like this, to just sort of let the world just dictate, or you dictate, moreover, like you just get to kind of go and do what you want. You're just sort of getting to roam around. Now that has pluses and minuses. You might wander into an area you're completely unprepared for, or maybe there's just certain areas that are far more terrible than others. I'm looking at you, Kylid. Anybody that ever went to Kylid had that sense of, why am I here? I don't ever want to come back. There was another article sort of in this vein of being compared to Elden Ring from xfire.com, and the title of the article was "The Lords of the Fallen Feels Like a Darker Elden Ring." They went on to say the Game Awards had its share of action-adventure game reveals. One interesting title that caught our attention was The Lords of the Fallen, a game that, at least from its gameplay trailer, looks and feels like a darker version of Elden Ring. So it's a good thing that these guys are okay with that comparison and they take it as a huge positive, because it isn't going to stop, and it wouldn't surprise me if when it comes out, that review, that headline, that funnel of information, anytime you check on how this game's doing, you will likely see it up there contrasted and compared to Elden Ring. One final thought on the comparisons to Elden Ring and From Software games that I think is an important thing to mention. The Lords of the Fallen is being built in the Unreal Engine. Unreal 5, actually. And we've seen very promising things from Unreal 5. I know there's issues with Unreal 5 on PC with different things with textures and bugs. Some of those things have not been resolved quite yet. Maybe Epic will push out updates and help alleviate some of those problems, because some people aren't too thrilled at the trend in the industry right now with so many games going to the Unreal 5 engine. They're sort of worried about what that means for the future. But I see this as a big positive for one simple reason. The From Software engine is known for its frame pacing issues and some of its frame timing issues, and you saw some of this met out in Elden Ring. Day one, there was issues with stuttering and different things with respect to frame pacing and frame timing. To this day, at least, I don't know if it's to this day, but the last couple times I tried it on my PlayStation 5 and I tried to play the PlayStation 5 version, I still got random hitches and snags, which is not something that you want to see or experience when you're playing a game like this. So I think it's incredibly promising, at least from a graphical fidelity and just very impressive art style and execution and lighting, that they're going with Unreal 5. Now, will that lend itself to a game with incredibly challenging moment-to-moment combat? I don't know. We haven't seen enough just yet, but there are a lot of games going this direction. Hellblade 2 will be in the Unreal Engine. It'll be in Unreal 5, and they have said that they want their combat to be far more brutal and challenging. That's another game that's going to have that very similar third-person combat, melee-driven combat, that likely you're going to need to be on your toes, staying alive and surviving. If anything, hopefully this can spawn more games if they can master this style of game in Unreal 5. Plenty of other companies could take a crack at it, because if you've never played some of the indie titles that come out that are Souls-like, there's some pretty good smaller titles out there. I particularly enjoyed Thymesia, and if I had time, I actually think I would have played The Last Hero of Nostalgaia to completion. It was actually pretty enjoyable. I found the combat to be responsive, and I actually had to turn one feature off. They had a freezing effect that would happen when you got hit, and it really threw off timing for me. As soon as I turned that off, I was having a much better time. But I think those are two examples of games that I think are enjoyable and are, dealing in that FromSoft thing. And Thymesia really listened and took good feedback from people. I highly recommend that. If you're sort of waiting for a game in the vein of Souls-likes while you're waiting on the Lords of the Fallen, or maybe you've done, maybe a few too many playthroughs of Elden Ring, it'd be a great time to check out Thymesia. So all in all, I think the Lords of the Fallen looks beautiful. I think the co-op features sound good, even though I'm not a huge fan of the PvP. I think ultimately it's encouraging that they don't mind being compared to Elden Ring. So at this point, as we wait for Lords of the Fallen, the real question is, can they deliver on the Souls-like format in an open world and hit similar heights to Elden Ring, or will they fly too close to the sun and die 1,000 deaths of comparison? Only time will tell.